for the cities. But while rail is part of the solution, it cannot just be rail that looks good on paper and in design. And we believe that the resilience of these mass transport systems will be critical because they will withstand a variety of pressures. And that's what we want to talk about today. Africa is on a fantastic growth in terms of railway projects. With more than 50 cities above 1 million inhabitants, the continent has a host of transport projects in the pipeline with public support, with different sources of financing, and definitely with political sponsoring. But we also have challenges. And I think, as you know all too well, some parts of the networks are not electrified or no longer electrified, as we heard in the previous panel. Some parts of the network are aging. Because of budget constraints, the maintenance of this infrastructure is often delayed. Other capital choices are made, resulting in degraded infrastructure. And that's where resilience comes in, which I want to define for a second. As you admire the tramway of Bordeaux, which continues to run in spite of flooding. So this is a tramway that gets fed electricity from the ground. You see there's no catenary, there's no overhead cable, but when there's flooding, it still continues to operate. And it kind of pictures what we want to talk about in terms of resilience, i.e., the system keeps running and there are no excuses, quote unquote, despite weather events, despite any kind of pressure. So the formal definition is really the ability of your rail system to resist, absorb, adapt, and recover from stresses, from pressure. But more importantly, it's the way to do this while maintaining safety and performance. So you might ask, okay, but how from here would we get on a path of building in resilience into a system? What does it take to have those characteristics, and how do we go from the current state to a more resilient state? And there's a host of answers that you can think of, but we like to bucket them into three big pieces on the infrastructure itself, the signaling and the controlling of the system. Of course, then, secondly, there's the equipment itself, so the rolling stock, how robust it is, how tough is it, what can it withstand as pressure. And last but not least, there's funding. Because as we heard in some of the previous panels, if you don't have money, you just don't have a project, or not for very long. So moving to the first block on infrastructure, signaling, and controlling, I think we all hear a lot these days about AI, about data, about understanding what the data means, drawing insights from data. And the way it applies in mass transport systems is with a host of captors, sensors, and measuring instruments that will capture this data both along the tracks and in the stations. And so whether you're talking analysis of your system, for example, in the communication systems, or sifting through the logs from the signaling logs, understanding what is physically happening on your point machine or on the level crossings to detect when these have a risk to fail, or when they're showing premature signs of usage that it may be time to replace them before they fail, and other equipments along the track. In the station themselves, with the focus on energy frugality, there's many ways to measure energy consumption inside of stations and how the stations behave from an energy standpoint. And also video is an obvious source of data. So with the assumption that private rules are respected, it's a much cleaner way and simpler way to count passengers. And that's important to understand at which time of day is your platform crowded, on which part of your platform are most of the flows going, and to detect patterns. It's also a fantastic way to bring the best help to disabled passengers. Resilience is also something that customers can build in via their maintenance models, meaning via the service that they bring to their vehicles. And it's really about choosing for the customer which maintenance model they will have. And that can start from a simple on-demand call of spare parts and repairs, which is all the way on the left, to a fully fledged long-term service support plus, which essentially means that the whole service and maintenance activity is taken over by a private company, for example, Alstom, up to the level of being accountable for securing standards of quality, safety, reliability, and availability on behalf of the customer. Or as you see up on the top, it can also mean managing the inventory for the customer. And then there's various ranges in between, but it all goes in the same direction of resilience, in that when the customer has their parts on time and these parts are mounted on the trains, then the trains can more quickly return a service or not interrupt service, either in passenger applications or in freight applications. On the signaling front, it's fairly obvious that without a signaling system, you don't have a system. It's a little bit like the nervous system of mass transport, and it talks to the frequency at which trains or locomotives operate. So really, the cycle time at which these vehicles enter and leave the stations. And one interesting example that comes from India has been hybrid train detection. And what this hybrid train detection is a set of virtual blocks which cannot overlap each other. And so inside of those virtual blocks, you'll have your rolling stock, and the system is designed that these trains cannot collide or interfere with one another because they're kept separate because of these virtual blocks. It was a first in India, so it was deployed on a corridor of about 80 kilometers between Delhi and Meerut. And it's also a system that's been interfaced with the platform screen doors, meaning that these doors in the stations can only be activated by the detection of the train and by a system, which means more safety for passengers in the stations. Most crucially, what the system has delivered for the community and the customers in India has been the travel time reduction. What used to be a 100-minute trip between these two cities is now down to 1 hour. And so with that technology, all the while increasing the safety standards. So with that technology, the day-to-day commute of Indians and also the fare collection from the authorities has been completely changed, and also with a more resilient system. It's obviously got an impact on CO2 emissions as well. This hybrid train detection quickly is a reference that's also been deployed in other places, in Rome on about a 56 kilometers line, and on a long stretch of rail in France between Paris and Lyon of about 500 kilometers. So there are various stages of execution, but it is in service in India. And we at Alstom believe that there could be applications for such a system on the continent because of its rather quick implementation, yet game-changing nature in moving to virtual blocks and having the latest in signaling technology. The second pillar around rolling stock, and really, so essentially your vehicles, focuses on hybrid vehicles. We think that to be resilient, you also need agility. You need to have options. You need to be able to adapt on the move. And one way to do that is to have vehicles which have different power modes, which can be propelled with different fuel types. And I know that many people in this conference are in the business of batteries, or many people in this industry are thinking along these lines, trying to provide flexibility to operators and trying to provide with options whenever an electrified part of the section has been de-electrified, whether that comes from vandalism, from theft, from natural events. So the industry is brainstorming this. What Alstom wants to bring into the brainstorm on the passenger side is a diesel-electric power car. And it's pretty simple on paper. It's really about installing this power car in the middle of the consist, which will provide electricity to the motor cars. So it's still an electric train in a way, because this diesel pack provides electricity to the traction, and the traction remains electric. So what that achieves, it really gives the driver of the train and the operator an option between going diesel or staying with electric, and always comparing the benefits of each solution. Now, this development has got some use cases that are being studied. For example, in Nairobi, Kenya, it's public knowledge that there's a World Bank program to study a project, and this could have a practical application there. In the Eastern Cape, which is plagued by less electrified parts of the network, and other parts in South Africa and beyond, Maputo to Nelspruit corridor could also be an idea, because that's a line which has a lot of tourist interest, and which part of that line is not electrified, and with huge challenges at the border crossing with delays. So perhaps a train line, if working, could reduce these custom times. And then Botswana, just to name a few, but there are others. A similar but different application exists in the space of locomotives, to move freight. And without going too deep into it, it's a pretty similar idea, except that this time you don't add a power car. You just work with the existing locomotives, and you try to reorganize the vital organs of that locomotive to fit in a diesel pack. And what that allows is really to continue to operate. It will not be neck-breaking speed. It will operate at 20 kilometers per hour. Nevertheless, that's a huge change versus having a loco that it remains stuck because it doesn't have a catenary. It's missing electricity, even if it's only missing it for a few kilometers. So this solution will allow you to bridge on an unelectrified section of the line and continue operations, which really means continue to generate revenue for the operator, which is all too critical. So less interruptions to revenue earning rolling stock. The last pillar is around funding, and it's a fair statement that these mega infrastructure projects cannot exist without funding. And we see that more and more it's difficult for countries to only rely on their fiscus as the only source of funding. And there's a case to be made for diversifying the sources of funding. Of course, the fiscus with budget. And that we've talked in the previous panel on PPPs. Alstom's uniquely positioned because of its industrial footprint to have access to a whole host of financial players, be that development agencies, governments, investment funds, and export credit agencies plus ROSCOs, which we try to leverage to stitch together some deals in the PPP space, that's a cross-section of them, or also in EPC plus F schemes, where we combine ECA funding, DFI funding, and development funding, also G2G. We think that the key is not to try to identify the one source of funding that will be silver bullet. That's not been the experience we've had on the continent and beyond. The successes that we've seen governments materialize and operators materialize has come when different sources of funding have been stitched together, have been collated, and have been essentially allowed these projects to be sustained over their long lifetime. In some of these projects, they will go for 20 years. And so you have to have a very, very robust financing setup to sustain that time. And there will be changes politically in that time. There will be a whole lot of things happening. The price of the barrel will fluctuate. Price of commodities will change, creating pressures on the national fiscuses. Okay, those are just a few words on the financing side. As I conclude, I want to leave you with Alstom's absolute commitment to the continent and to be part of solutions for mobility on the continent. We've been present for decades in South Africa and on the rest of the continent, but more than ever, we're ready to act as a responsible private partner and really participate in any private sharing participation. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you on the stands.
Thank you so much, Tristan.
Thank you,
great.
Guy.
Very nice presentation. Great words there by Tristan. Very interesting presentation. I implore everybody to go and visit the Alstom stand. It's just outside. Everybody heard Makola speaking earlier on the various PPP points, and I see Sasha's also sitting in the crowd, so please do chat to the team. They are a key supporter of stimulating rail development in South Africa and more broadly throughout Africa. And without further ado, we are running just on the nick of time, and I'd like to very quickly introduce our next session, which is actually the keynote address, and it's essentially to welcome everybody to Africa Rail 2025. And with that said, I'd like to introduce the Honourable Minister of Transport of the Republic of South Africa, Miss Barbara Creecy. Please could we give her a warm round of applause. And there's also a roaming mic right here.
Good morning. How's the sound? Bad? Good. Only people in the front row are raising their fingers. Clearly, we're not audible in the back row. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to acknowledge the representatives of foreign governments from our African continent and abroad, including permanent secretaries, directors general, chief executive officers, captains of industry, members of the rail industry and operators from South Africa, SADC, and the African continent at large, members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to deliver a keynote address at this, the 25th African Rail Conference and Exhibition, with the theme Invest, Development and Technology for Rail Operators, Users, Government and Investors. When I look at the 12 themes that are going to be discussed during the course of this conference, I am convinced that this event is taking place at an opportune time for South Africa and the African continent as a whole. Rail transport is crucial for efficient and sustainable logistics, impacting both the movement of people and goods. It's particularly important for long-distance freight, potentially offering efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and of course environmental benefits compared to road transport. Rail also plays a key role in economic development and urban planning by facilitating trade and connecting communities. In short, it has a vital role to play in the development of our continent. By maintaining and expanding our rail networks, we can better connect and integrate our nations across the continent. The SADC region has a combined rail network of over 40,000 kilometers, excluding branch lines. This demonstrates the vast expanse of our railway infrastructure and why it must be positioned at the center of an efficient passenger and freight transport system for the region. A focus on more effectively migrating freight from road to rail could harness our region's economic potential and ensure that the objectives of policies such as the African Continental Free Trade Area can be realized. It is in this regard that it is important to note the significance of the African Union Resolution of 2016-2017 declaring South Africa as a hub of rail manufacturing in Africa, thus keeping manufacturing of rail and its components within our continent. As a sign of South Africa's intention to play a leading role in the revitalization and expansion of the continent's rail industry, we formally deposited the Luxembourg Rail Protocol for ratification on the 28th of January this year. The ratification became effective on the 1st of May. South Africa has thus become the 6th state and second African state after Gabon to ratify this protocol. The ratification of the Luxembourg Rail Protocol is an essential part of the rail open access strategy of our government. This would open international financing possibilities to new market entrants in terms of cheaper financing for railway rolling stock and the economic and environmental benefits of moving freight and passengers from road to rail. South Africa's ratification of the protocol supports the development of international financing in the sector, and it's an important step in facilitating financing in the rail industry, which, as I've already said, is key to economic growth in the SADC region and the continent as a whole. As a country, we therefore encourage all countries in the region and continent to consider this important instrument to enable rail investment with favorable terms that will foster interoperability of our railways. This gathering takes place at a very significant moment in the history of rail transport in our own country. Our country has embarked on a massive rail reform program that seeks to improve the performance of our economy through revitalizing the freight logistics and also the passenger rail sector. These reforms align perfectly with the key themes of this year's conference, including investment, development, and technology. Inefficiencies and widespread vandalism and theft of rail infrastructure threatened to hamper South Africa's economic opportunities in the post-pandemic period when growth and job creation is so badly needed. This, combined with the logistics crisis in the country during the 23-24 festive season, compelled us to embark on a program of ambitious reform. Our agenda is informed by the White Paper on National Rail Policy of 2022 and complemented by the National Freight Logistics Roadmap of 2023. The National Rail Policy aims to position the rail sector as the backbone of the transport value chain and foregrounds the importance of economic regulation to enable private sector participation and third-party access, while the rail network and port infrastructure remain state-owned. To address this, we have established a new institution, the Transport Economic Regulator, to guide the implementation of economic regulation in the rail sector and ensure regulatory certainty and fair risk allocation for private sector involvement. This process includes frameworks for network access, tariff methodology, service levels, and a contractual framework. In December last year, the Department of Transport issued the network statement and rail access tariffs for 24-25. Right now, we are working to publish the network statement and rail access tariffs for 25-26 for our rail industry. Open access to the rail network will allow train operating companies to increase the volume of goods transported by rail while our network infrastructure remains state-owned. This will ensure that South African minerals, vehicles, and agricultural produce reach international markets, securing jobs and earning much-needed revenue for our fiscus. As part of our rail reform program, we have also created the new Transnet Rail Infrastructure Manager, or what we call TRIM, to have a dedicated focus on the management of rail infrastructure. The Transnet Freight Rail operating company will focus on the transportation of rail commodities through its rolling stock. On the 8th of December 2023, Cabinet approved the private sector participation framework to guide private sector participation in this industry. The framework mandates our department to establish a unit to build state capacity and assist Transnet and PRASA with the procurement of potential PSP projects. To realize the establishment of the PSP unit, the department has already concluded a memorandum of understanding with the Development Bank. Both the department and National Treasury have appointed DBSA as the agent for housing this new unit. The department has identified the first phase of PSP projects to be undertaken for both passenger and freight rail. The PSP unit and Transnet have developed the RFIs on 5 priority corridors. And the purpose of the RFIs is to ensure that we achieve market information that will guide us in August this year when we will put out calls for proposals on the freight rail sector. We are currently preparing a new RFI for passenger rail that will be released within the next month. Now, the white paper on national rail policy also provides for the development of a national rail master plan to ensure that we have a comprehensive evidence-based framework that outlines the future of rail development in the country as a whole from now until 2050. I have spoken a great deal on the important strides we have made to re-establish the freight network. Similar strides are being taken for the passenger network. PRASA has undertaken an extensive campaign of upgrading and refurbishing stations and depots that were subjected to vandalism during the COVID pandemic. And I can report to you today that as a result of these efforts, 34 of the priority 40 lines have been re-entered into service, with all services on the Cape Town Central Line set to be restored in the coming weeks. Work is ongoing to re-signal PRASA's commuter lines, which will, of course, increase the frequency of passenger services and train slots so that we can achieve our target of 600 million passenger journeys by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, when I came here this morning and I saw the long queues stretching outside this venue, I wondered whether there was a decision taken to give middle-class people social relief of distress grants. I was pleased to find out that, in fact, you, like me, are firmly convinced that rail is the future of our country, and therefore it was enormously important for you to be here today. This is an incredibly exciting time for anyone who has an interest in rail. It is a time when over the next couple of years we will see major reform and major revitalization of our rail sector. That reform and revitalization can only be good for jobs, it can only be good for business, it can only be good for economic growth. With vision and policy implementation and determination, we can ensure that together we usher in a new era of logistical efficiency and inclusive growth for our country and our continent. I thank you.
Very important words said by the Minister there for us all to take and heed as a bit of a call. With us ratifying the Luxembourg Protocol, it essentially means that we can get more rolling stock onto our tracks. And with that said, over time, it's going to become more and more affordable for us to actually use those same tracks as passengers. Just a quick note before I introduce the next session. There's naturally quite a lot of you in the hall. I'd just like to request that when you do start filing out, that you do so carefully. And I'd just like to request that everybody that's sitting by the door just open up a bit of space so that everyone can file out. We just don't want to have a bit of a concern there and a bit of a bottleneck. So please do make space for everyone that would like to exit the theatre so that they can. And with that said, I'd just like to introduce our next speaker. We did have the Honourable Mr. Sirleaf Ralph Tyler, the Minister of Transport from the Government of the Republic of Liberia, set to speak to us. But unfortunately, he's been unavoidably detained, and we're going to have to move to the next session, which is actually a keynote presentation by the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport and the Gautrain Management Agency. And that presentation will be given by the CEO, Mr. Tshepo Kobe, from the Gautrain Management Agency of South Africa. Could we please welcome him to the stage with a warm round of applause? And for the media, if anybody would like to get a Q&A from PRASA, they will have that available. With the Minister, that is. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I have the presentation up? Good morning, Minister, and good morning, all foreign dignitaries that are here in the hall. The whole point of protocol is for you to observe it, and therefore allow me to greet all dignitaries rather than just simply saying protocol observed. The more important conversation today is specific to the issues that are now lie in our current challenges as Gauteng. And it's about enhancing connectivity through rail, and therefore making sure that we are servicing the whole of Gauteng with rail as a whole. Because in actual fact, there is no other way of getting out of where we are except through, what do they call it? Through rail itself or mass transit. Now, I'll deal with the context, conceptualize the network itself, and then deal with a few corridor designs, and then come back to what we need to do. Now, in essence, when you look at this, it tells you that it's about us forging a new future for Gauteng as a whole. And as we forge a new future for Gauteng, you also have to think about, we have to become a shaping force that then allows us to be able to make sure that the mobility ecosystem functions. And the mobility ecosystem doesn't function when its primary mode does not function very well. And at this point in time, our rail in Gauteng as our primary mode, as we had agreed in the Integrated Transport Master Plan of 2014, that will become the manner in which we do things, does not function very well. And therefore, we have to make sure that it works better. It is about us creating a province that is thriving. It's about economic impact more than it being about anything else. When you look at it, it tells you that we have to leverage the mobility ecosystem, drive urban efficiency, and then development along the rail backbone. This is an economic impact project. It's not just about transport, and it's not just about moving people. It is about us ensuring that what you see at the back of, what do they call it, of Sandton Station being here, what you see at the back of Rosebank Station being there, actually is, we grow it. We make sure that it actually becomes better than what it is. It's about us making us having a forward outlook that moves us forward as a province. This is a bit of a busy slide, and when you look at it, in essence, it's about enhancing customer utility. Why enhancing customer utility? We have to come up with norms and standards. It cannot be that the one service that runs properly, you look at it and say, well, the Gautrain works well because it's funded too much and all sorts of other things. It's about us making sure that we lift up all the entire ecosystem of transport. It's about ensuring service sustainability. And service sustainability is about us making sure that we can commercialize a lot of our rail assets and making sure that we don't spend that much money from the fiscus. It's about driving economic opportunities, and then ultimately the ease of delivery. Can you hear me? Okay. My father is a preacher, so I've tried by all means not to stand behind the pulpit every time I speak. So when you look at this, we have to make sure that we match where people live, where the jobs are, and also look at the network that we have to be able to say, does it serve these situations, the two of them? The darker the part you look at here, it's about us looking at densification. And you can see a lot more of the densification is away from our current rail network. And therefore, it means there is no public transport where you're looking at it. The jobs themselves also are still in the urban core. And in the urban core in itself, you have some level of servicing, but not as much as you would like to have. The slide itself also says there are townships which are growing much faster in terms of their densification outside of the current network. Can we have a network that actually services those townships and actually accounts for the fact that there is much more of a bigger challenge? When you look at the other slide on the one end, it tells you that densification has occurred, but it has not occurred where we were looking for it. It has occurred on its own, and urbanization in itself has happened in places where you don't want it to happen. Now, this just tells you that in terms of land use and the ability to be able to service the different areas, people live somewhere else, but the jobs are actually somewhere else. And the more dense it gets, the more it tells you that we need to be able to think differently about all of this. This tells you about the non-residential developments that have occurred around, what do they call it, around the whole of the province, and that non-residential developments still are occurring in particular areas, but also you're finding new non-development residential developments that are further away from the current transport setup. Now, if you never learn anything from me today, you learn this one thing. You are a province that is congested, that will remain congested, and will further be congested if we do nothing. Where you are overall. So that's the inner ring road. That is the outer ring road. That is the R80 going north. That's the R59 going south, and various roads that, what do they call it? Compare the previous two maps that I showed you, where the houses are, where, what do they call it, the developments are, and ultimately where the jobs opportunities are. It's telling you that you are sending more traffic into an already very congested province. And this is the, what do they call it, is the evening peak of the, what do they call it, of the various parts of the province. So look at it. It says, this is the realistic situation. That is the optimistic one. The optimistic one says to you that if we try to do a few things, try to build a few more roads, try to do this and that, it will actually get a little bit better, but you will still remain a congested province. Now, this is something you have to worry about. This slide says to you, in the morning, you are stuck at home. So if you look at the red areas are the areas where, in essence, they are closer to the residential areas. In the morning, you are stuck at home. So our previous logic that says, develop a system that has a central node, and then the central node, people will travel to it, and therefore then will then enable you to say that, okay, people will move from their houses and drive to some point, take mass transit, and then go to where they want to go. Does not work. Because this slide says to you, in the morning, for 3 hours, you are stuck at home. If you look at the central urban regions here in the middle, that's Johannesburg there, that's Pretoria at the top there, and then that's Kempton Park and those areas there. In the AM peak, they're telling you that they're clean. But where are you? You're stuck at your house. Now, in actual fact, whatever network that we develop from here onwards has to be able to address this problem. Because this problem is the new logic of what happens to transport and what do they call it. Which means we have to design a network that goes to go and pick up the people closer to their houses rather than us depending on them driving somewhere else to be able to get to where they're going. Now that I've scared you, let's look at what could happen. So in essence, this is a network that encompasses the whole of the province, which actually not only resolves the issue of economic development, but actually talks about us collecting people from where they are. It accounts for the townships and the areas that, what do they call it, that were underserviced in the beginning. It actually also accounts for the fact that you need to be able to make sure that of a simple thing. Now, let's look at the current rail network and what it does. The brownish color or reddish color that goes up and down is the current bigger rail network of the province. And the current bigger rail network of the province was designed to be able to feed the cities. What we found out when we did our modeling, it showed that 70% of all travel across the whole of the province are intermunicipal travel. So which literally means people are not traveling into the cities that they live in, but they travel to the next city and the next city. And therefore, you cannot think of it and look at that network, what it does. If you're coming from Soshanguve and Mabopane, you have to go first into town for you to be able for you to get into central Johannesburg. That's not how people live. Nobody says, I'll wake up in the morning, I'll go to Pretoria and see what happens there, and then I'll go from there and I'll look at... So people want to travel to the areas where economic nodes are. Sandton, the Lanseria SEZ, the area, what do they call it, where all the special economic zones are the areas that people want to travel to. And therefore, we must develop a network that says to you, and this is a bigger logic of what we are saying. We're saying to you, the old network that only services certain particular regions does not work anymore. In actual fact, the old network that only services and does not account for the townships and does not actually bring you to a point where you have no need for a car is dead. And therefore, we have to be able to think differently about that network. What we need to also account for is the fact that in the long-term planning of what they call it, of high-speed rail, which is the big map that is there, we have to account for the fact that when the high-speed rail arrives later on, when it gets done, it has to be able to account for the Gautrain being this central portion of the, what do they call it, of the line. And that in itself means that just like in any other city, if you're in Paris and you're traveling on the high-speed network, it arrives onto the local network and then you get distributed through the high-speed, the local higher speed network. So this accounts for that. So the plan that we've built also accounts for the fact that when the high-speed rail is built, the network would already be proved to do what it needs to do. These are conceptual stations that we've already come up with. You can see we're going even further out to the locations. There's Katlehong, there's the Alberton area, there's the Tambo Springs area in the map. Some of the network is going to be easy, but some of it is not going to be easy. The area that you can see, parts of it are in tunnel, and then the green parts is at grade. This is the network going south into the, into the Orange Farm area. And yes, we're going as far as that. We're going as far as to all the edges of the province as a whole. This is a much easier, line to build because most of it is farmlands, and it's going to be at grade. This is the line going north, running past Lanseria Airport, through Atteridgeville, all the way up into, into the area of Soshanguve and Hammanskraal. This is the Hammanskraal line, and this also becomes part of the arrival portion of the Limpopo rail. This is part of the network. Looking at it, it's also a good network to build because most of it is going to be at grade because at the current moment it's farmlands. Well, it goes to where it needs to go to and therefore collects the people at home. I thank you.
All right. Extremely insightful presentation by Mr. Kobe. I must say, I traveled up on the R59 to get to here today, and it literally is a 90-minute drive. And then you still got to account for another 30 minutes because when you get to your destination, more traffic has built up while you were traveling, or an accident, more congestion. So it's pretty much endless in that sense. And I really appreciate having this kind of line of sight because I've used, for example, the high train system. It's great to be able to hop on a train in different locations and it take you across the entire province because the difference between that and what I experienced today is probably about half the amount of time, roughly about the same cost at present state. But I think that myself and Mr. Rudy Dix, who's the head of project management at the National Logistics Crisis Committee, are going to be unpacking that a little bit more with some of the questions that we've prepared. And with that said, could I please ask everybody to give myself and Rudy a warm round of applause? We're going to have a one-on-one chat. Thank you, everyone. Don't stress about it.
Okay,
I think
cool.
that everybody is eager to hear
Okay, cool.
what's been happening, and that's more than enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So, for those of you guys that are attending this for the first time, myself and Rudy had a great chat last year about what is currently happening among the National Logistics Crisis Committee, and the team has been doing a really great job. And the last 12 months actually show for it. And just yesterday, while I was at Transnet, it's reinforced in context of what the broader agenda is to move goods, cargo, passengers forward. And I implore all of you to stick around because we've got the Group Chief Executive for PRASA is going to be chatting to everybody just after this. But before we get into that, Rudy, so the last year, I'm pretty sure has been quite an eventful one. I mean, for our part, we see more trucks on the roads, like what I was just saying. And there's a lot more logistics companies that have set up shop in very close proximity to some of the nodes. And looking at all of that, it's really making it more difficult for everybody in the audience and even myself to get to wherever we're trying to go, although we do obviously understand that there's an economic benefit attached to the transportation of those goods. But with that said, I wanted to touch on the topic of open access and actually allowing the network to facilitate private sector participation. The Transnet team was very vocal about that just yesterday, and the panel earlier this morning was reiterating that very same thing. Could you perhaps define that a little bit for the audience to explain to them what is open access in context of rail and logistics, and why is it so critical for our national growth?
Absolutely, okay. And I recall the conversations last year, and many would recall that we adopted the freight logistics roadmap, and we made lots of promises, and I think people are always skeptical about the fact that when you talk about